The 1945 film Dillinger was a semi-fictionalized crime drama about the rise and fall of notorious gangster John Dillinger. It's played here by Lawrence Tierney. This also starred Anne Jeffreys and Edmund Lowe, and it was an entertaining crime film in which Tierney really stands out as the legendary gangster character. I'll give a summary of the film, spoiler-free, and then offer some closing thoughts. Well, the film opens up, and we have an audience in a movie theater, and it's like a movie in the movie, and they are watching this movie about Dillinger, and the announcer talks about Dillinger and his gang and his life of crime, robbing banks, with some, various film clips of his exploits. Now, the movie stops, and we are introduced to the character of Pa Dillinger, played by actor Victor Killian, who comes out on stage and tells us nervously a little bit about the life of young Dillinger and how he headed off to the city to make it big. And that's kind of our introduction to the character. And we suddenly cut to Lawrence Tierney as John Dillinger, and he is there at a restaurant sharing his big schemes with a lady friend. Now, he's unable to buy a drink with a check. Now, the waiter, as played here by actor Lou Lubin, says that they only take cash there. Now, Dillinger leaves and holds up a shop around the corner to get some money, but on fleeing the scene, he is promptly arrested. So it's off to prison, and it's here that Dillinger winds up in a cell with an older, wiser man with glasses. His name is Specs Green, go figure. He's played here by Edmund Lowe. Now, he's rude to this Specs character initially, but soon discovers that he's the smartest bank man in the country, so he befriends him and realizes that he might be able to help him out later in life with his crime antics. So Spec introduces him to some of the other members of his crew, and quite a few familiar faces here in this film. You've got Eduardo Cianelli as Marco Minelli, Elisha Cook Jr. as a character Kirk Otto, and Mark Lawrence as a character Doc Madison. Now, Dillinger has these grand ambitions of breaking out, and he's going to free all these other guys so that they can continue their life of crime, but they are all sort of dismissive of his optimism. Well, his release date comes around, and Dillinger heads out, and he goes to a movie. And while he is there, he chats with the lovely ticket attendant, Helen, played here by actress Anne Jeffreys. But then, after the show, he returns and unexpectedly robs her and leaves with all the theater earnings. Well, Helen goes to the police, and they are able to identify Dillinger in a mugshot, and he's there for the lineup, and he's got a big cheesy grin. But once she sees him, I don't know, maybe she's had a change of heart and fallen for the guy because she decides not to turn him in, and instead the both of them head out to get Chinese food together. What? Well, Dillinger has sent a note to the guys in lockup, letting them know of his plan to help them escape. And this involves sneaking in a barrel that will be filled with firearms, and they will be able to get this while they are doing their quarry duty. The barrel will be marked with a white cross. And sure enough, his buddies are able to make a break for it using the weapons in the barrel that Dillinger has sent to them. And the film really does not waste a minute. These guys get out, and we cut right to a montage of Dillinger and all of his crony holding up banks all over Indiana. So a little later, back at their hideout, the guys talk and plan their next job. Now we see here that it's actually Specs who's sort of the boss of the operation, somewhat to Dillinger's annoyance. So there's a little tension between the two. So the guys there just settle in to play cards, and Dillinger heads out with Helen. And they go back to the same bar from the beginning of the film. And it's that same waiter from before. Now Dillinger seems to politely buy 3 beers for him, his sweetie, and the waiter, who seems a little puzzled. And he says, "Many happy returns." But Dillinger, he's up to something. He tells Helen to leave. And then, following a toast with their beers, tells the guy that he's there for revenge, because earlier he wouldn't cash his check. Dillinger then smashes his glass, and then through a very clever edit, gets his revenge. It's a very interesting scene how they frame it. Well, a little bit later, Dillinger goes and checks out a bank. Now, he goes in like he's a potential customer, and he's talking to the bank manager and learns all about the layout of the place. And a little bit later at the hideout, Dillinger has an idea of the bank heist and how they could do it, but Specs isn't having it, and he just rips up his plans. So these two just can't quite get along. But we get to the scene of the heist, and it's all rainy outside as the guys arrive for the robbery, and Detonating some gas bombs, they make off with their loot and escape. Now, back at their base again, as the money's being split up, Dillinger kind of stands up and insists on taking a double cut, not Specs. So this power play takes a different direction on the leadership of the gang. It's like Dillinger wants to call the shots now. So the police are on the move. A dragnet is underway to try to catch these guys. And meanwhile, Dillinger goes out and buys Helen some jewelry. And then immediately returns around and robs the place. The gang reunite again at a lodge that's owned by Kirk's foster parents, and they seem a little suspicious of these sketchy characters. When they suspect that the cops are in town looking for them, they head out again through the west and continue their string of robberies. Now, while in Tucson, Dillinger develops a really severe toothache and cautiously goes to visit a dentist. And he gets all settled in. The dentist says, hey, everything's going to be fine. They give him the gas. And then he realizes he's been set up, and he is arrested as he collapses to the ground. Specs, it would seem, has betrayed him. And we see a little bit later, there's Specs smiling as he reads the newspaper headline about Dillinger's capture. Now, in lockup, Dillinger befriends another inmate, and he buys a block of wood and a carving knife from the guy, which he cleverly carves into the shape of a gun. And after adding some black polish to it to make it look authentic, he makes his escape. Pretty clever. So he's out of lockup, and Dillinger is riding with Helen and the character Tony, played by actor Ralph Lewis. And of course, Dillinger seems a little suspicious of this guy, that maybe he's a little too friendly with Helen. Now, back at their hideout, Specs asks Dillinger how he managed to escape. And there's a brief tense scene as Dillinger shows him the wooden gun pointed right at him. And, Specs is all like, oh, I didn't betray you. But once it's revealed to be a fake gun, everybody has a good laugh about it. And then Dillinger shoots and kills Specs. Okay, wow. So now he is firmly in control of the gang. So he plans his next heist. This time it's going to be on a train. So he has this elaborate scheme where he will be on board the train with the other guys. He will be dressed as a conductor. And they act out their plan, and it seems to be going well so far, but then things kind of fall apart. Kirk is shot and killed, and Dillinger is wounded. So the guys make their escape, and they return to the lodge to recover. But later that night, Dillinger is awoken by the noise that he hears out in the hall, and he finds Otto's parents about to make a call, presumably to the cops. And yeah, he takes them out. So the next day, they believe the police are moving in, so they're going to all take off. Tony wants to leave with Helen, just together, the two of them. And, I can't blame him for wanting to run off with Ann Jeffries, but seriously, her fella happens to be a homicidal lunatic. So probably not the best idea here, Tony. And as you can expect, Dillinger takes care of Tony with an axe and then leaves alone with Helen. Now, shortly after, Marco and Doc are apprehended by the law at the lodge. Dillinger and Helen escape to Chicago, and they do this long-term hideout. And he seems to be going a little stir-crazy. He can't really go anywhere or leave his room. Finally, around July of 1934, after months of hiding, Dillinger has just had enough. He dons some sunglasses and a mustache, and he goes with Helen to take in a film. But is this a good idea? Well, you probably know the end of the story, but I'll let the review end here. And honestly, there isn't much more to the film, so you can see for yourself how the film ends. But let me close out this review. Dillinger was released in 1945, and it was produced by brothers Maurice and Frank King with Monogram Pictures. I don't know if it's in the public domain. Monogram Pictures seem to be kind of hit or miss, but I'll find out from YouTube, I'm sure, whenever I upload this review. It was directed by Max Nosek with a screenplay by Philip Yordan. The musical score was by the legendary Dmitri Tiomkin. So my impressions on this film, it was an enjoyable and fast-paced gangster film. And honestly, the film just flies past at just around 1 hour and 10 minutes. It's a very quick film. I honestly never get tired of old gangster films, and even low-budget ones like this are a treat to me. It is seriously Lawrence Tierney's performance that makes this film so enjoyable. He's just amazing as the character of Dillinger. I love watching his facial expressions change through the film. As you try to read what's going on in his head and what he's about to do, like the scene where he's got the wooden gun pointed at Specs Green. He's just standing there, staring down the guy without a word. There's just some great moments of tension with scenes like that in the film. Or sometimes you'll just see him in the police lineup with that wry smile. Tierney just really nailed this film perfectly. A few weeks ago, I did a biography video of Tierney on my channel, as he's an actor with a very wild and colorful background story. He started out in Hollywood with a lot of potential. Dillinger was one of his first roles. You can even see it in the credits with the screen that says, "Introducing Lawrence Tierney." But while his career was starting to take off, he would be struggling with alcohol off screen. And this would lead to numerous arrests for drunken fights at bars and parties. He had dozens of arrests between 1944 and 51, mostly for public drunkenness and brawling. And this would lead to like a 90-day jail sentence and even a stay in a sanitarium. So it was things like this that would really hold him back in Hollywood, although he did see a resurgence in acting roles later in his life. And again, I go more into this in the biography video I have linked below. All this to say, Tierney makes a fantastic beginning role here as Dillinger, and I'd argue he's hands down the highlight of this film, and it's why this film is worth watching. Now, just a little background about the film. Now, look, if you're looking for a historically accurate story about Dillinger, well, just understand that this film takes a lot of liberties with history, and I say this as someone who's done a little research into the life of John Dillinger. There are some elements of the story that they're on the mark, but this is Hollywood telling a story, so there are more than a few differences here. His gang is heavily fictionalized. There was no Specs Green, but the real-life Dillinger was associated with actual criminals like Babyface Nelson, so a lot of things like that are missing in the film. Again, don't go into this looking for like a documentary, but just it's an enjoyable gangster film, loosely based on the life of Dillinger. Anne Jeffreys was lovely and charming as Dillinger's romantic interest, Helen. Now, watching her, I couldn't help but be reminded of a similarity with Virginia Mayo as a similar character in White Heat from 1949 with James Cagney. Even the detail of her being the gangster's Moll, who, while the protagonist is gone in lockup, gets into a relationship with another member of the gang, one who also has an unfortunate fate when the boss returns. I'll be honest that I didn't feel like Dillinger's relationship with her was very well developed in this film. I don't know, maybe it's just me. They have a few scenes together, but half the time he just seems to be snapping at her. We never really get a sense of what her motivations are to stay with this guy. But Anne Jeffreys is a lovely actress, and I would like to see other films that she has been in as I continue to explore old movies of the past. I thought that Edmund Lowe was great here as the character Specs, the one who has kind of the power struggle with Dillinger through the film. And it's also great to see Elisha Cook Jr. again as the gang member Kirk Otto, who loves eating those grapes. I mean, nothing says criminal like a fondness for eating grapes. But, it's still a very entertaining film. Just, again, not completely accurate, that's all. The background of the film is interesting in that the Hayes office forbid Hollywood from producing any films about the exploits of Dillinger. They said such a picture would be detrimental to the best public interest. So most major studios at the time stayed away from this individual. You would see Dillinger-like characters in films, say like Humphrey Bogart in The Petrified Forest in 1936 or High Sierra 1941. However, most studios stayed away from using the actual historic Dillinger. However, Monogram Pictures went ahead with the story of Dillinger, but they did downplay some of the things like, the Little Bohemia Lodge massacre, and they did show Dillinger and his gang hiding out at a lodge in the film, but there was never really a big shootout with the feds. And, you didn't really have characters like Babyface Nelson and so on. But even with the changes to the story, Dillinger did receive a negative reaction from the War Department in Washington and the Chicago Censorship Board, which banned the exhibition of Dillinger within city limits for 2 years. But the film was still popular enough to bring in over $4 million at the box office. And screenwriter Philip Yordan received a 1946 Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay. Now, a final note, like I often do, I love checking out the movie posters, which frequently make me chuckle with how the film is advertised. Blood, bullets, and blondes. Well, it's more than just that. It's a fine crime film with a very fast pace and some great acting, namely from Lawrence Tierney as John Dillinger. He really shines in the film as a believable gangster character. And you know what? You actually find yourself rooting for him. And I enjoyed the supporting cast as well. Again, not the most historically accurate, but still a fine gangster film, and it's one worth checking out.